Budget Review Subcommittee on Justice and Judiciary. This morning, we will hear from the State Budget Director and Commissioner of the Department of Juvenile Justice regarding an update on issues surrounding the department. We need to do a roll call, which should not take very long.
Representative Brown, Representative Decker, Representative Kulkarni, Representative Sharp, Representative Petrie, Representative Reed, Representative Elliott, Chair Flannery.
Table. Good morning. If you all could state your names for the record, please.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Hicks. I'm the Secretary of the Governor's Executive Cabinet and State Budget Director.
And I'm Vickie Reed. I'm the Commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Juvenile Justice.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Juvenile justice has been a hot topic the last several weeks, and I'm glad you all can make it today to discuss this topic and the numbers and budget surrounding it. And if you all want to proceed, I may interrupt shortly depending on what's stated and what questions I may have, but I will try not to interrupt too much. So if you all want to proceed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having us today. You're right, this is a very serious and current issue that we're dealing with. So Commissioner Reed and I will provide you today a comprehensive overview, of the Department of Juvenile Justice, the challenges that are facing, particularly the detention center component of the department, the actions the administration has taken and is currently taking, and we'll describe some of the recommendations the administration is making that we made in a presentation to the Juvenile Justice Work Group, Mr. Chairman, that you were part of recently. So just to say, I'm sitting in for Secretary Kerry Harvey today. Secretary Harvey had a already rescheduled medical procedure that he couldn't delay today, so I'm kind of sitting in his place. And then Commissioner Reed and I will tag team a little bit on this presentation. And Mr. Chairman, anytime you want to ask questions, we're happy to stop and go through that. But we're looking forward to working with this committee, other members of the General Assembly on crafting, some improvements, to this important public policy issue. So I'll turn it over to the Commissioner to introduce herself and start on the presentation.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here this morning talking about my favorite subject, which is juvenile justice. And I come into this with a background I think that's very fitting for it. I have a master's in criminal justice with a specialization in juvenile justice. And I've probably done just about everything you can do. I've worked in the detention center. I've been a probation officer. I ran an agency that ran group homes for adolescent teens. A couple of things I'm most proud about is I started the first foster care review board in Lexington before there was ever AOC involvement, before that became a thing. I also started the emergency shelter for teens that is there, and it has continued to this day, and it is the only shelter still operating in Lexington. So I'm proud that I was involved with that. I moved on eventually to state government. I worked for, back then, the Cabinet for Families and Children, and back then DJJ was not formed, and juvenile services were under that division. So when DJJ was created, I moved over and was involved. It was right after the consent decree, and I helped build it from the ground up, and it was one of the most exciting times of my life that we built the agency. I eventually retired, and for a while I just dabbled in some juvenile justice. I did some national things with the National Partnership for Juvenile Services, with the Campaign for Youth Justice and the Coalition of Juvenile Justice, two different agencies out of Washington, D.C. I wrote a book about juvenile justice, and I really wasn't ready for or thinking about full-time employment, but when the chance came up to do this job and go back, it was sort of a full circle thing to go back to the agency that I felt like I had an instrumental part in creating and try to take it forward. I knew it was going to be a challenging time. We were in the middle of a national pandemic, a national work shortage. And then I have to say Mother Nature didn't help us. I'd only been there a few months and the tornadoes came. And I don't know if you realize it, but we had a facility right there in Mayfield that got hit. and we had our staff and kids huddled in the building as everything ripped through there. Fortunately, everybody was okay, but the building sustained a fairly major hit, extensive. We had to move all the kids out within a few hours to all of our other facilities, and if that wasn't enough, then the floods came, and we had 3 facilities in Jackson, Kentucky, and we had staff unable to, they'd lost their homes, some of them everything gone, some just the car, some were marooned across a creek. So we had to close one of our group homes right there, move those kids out, try to move our staff over there to cover that. So that with the other issues, it really has been a challenging year. So one of the things I wanted to talk about with juvenile justice, a little explanation of how it all works. And it's kind of a very complicated thing. I'm not sure there's any other agency, maybe one, that deals with the range of what we do. We can have an 11-year-old that's in our facility for skipping school, and we can have an almost 18-year-old who's in there who's murdered 3 people. And so we're dealing, we're looking at one place for a kid to try to find a foster home, and we have another one who is 2 days away from turning 18, and on his 18th birthday, the adult jail will come at midnight and pick him up because he's being tried an adult and is facing a life sentence and moving to the adult jail. So we're really have a wide range of things. So let me start with just kind of explaining the thing people know most about, which is our facilities. And you can see there on this slide we have 4 different types. The regional juvenile detention centers are primarily for pre-adjudicated kids. And these are the kids involved in the court process. They've been arrested, for most of them, but they're still pending, what the court outcome is going to be for their case. And we have 8 of those, and you can see where they are there. We also have our post-disposition, and this is after the youth has gone before the court has made a determination, they have committed them or sentenced them to us, and then we place them in one of these facilities. So we have 7 youth development centers. You see the 5 listed too, and Adair and Campbell are a dual function, so those count in there. We also have group homes. We have 8 of those, and one nice thing about the group homes, since you all are the budget folks, is we get Medicaid for those, which pays for a lot of things. If we have a youth in a youth development center who needs surgery, it's state dollars that pay for that. But if a youth is in a group home, then Medicaid will do that. We also bill Medicaid for our treatment services. So we like to say the group homes are one of our more financially advantageous programs. And also they're good for kids because they're smaller and can serve specific functions. So we like those too. Our final one there is the day treatment centers. And we operate 6 that are DJJ operated, and we contract for 18 others with local school districts. So we serve a lot of kids in those programs. Those can be for kids who have finished a program, like they've been at, say, Lake Cumberland there, one of our facilities, and they've gone back home. Well, rather than put them back in regular school, we might have them go through our day treatment program as part of their reentry. We have some probated kids in which the judge orders them to attend. We have some that just come from pure school referrals. So that all of them work a little bit differently. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we have. If you want to, the other on there. So we have a total of 29 facilities, and I think a lot of people don't realize how many we have. So I mentioned that those were there. The other thing I'll just mention on the bottom there, it's a very important program, is our
If I can interrupt, how many of those facilities have closed?
Of these, none. These are the ones we have
This
open.
doesn't include the Linden facility?
It does.
It does.
Okay.
Because it's open now.
Okay.
Yeah. But there have been other facilities through the past years before I came and since then that have closed, but I'm not including those on there. The one other thing I did want to mention on there, because this is a unique thing for Kentucky, is our alternatives to detention. We are probably the only state in the nation that has this sort of a system. And I think if you talk to any of the juvenile court judges, they will tell you it's a function they really appreciate. And this is the ability, instead of placing a kid in secure detention, that we can put them on some sort of home detention, either with or without electronic monitoring. Or for some youth who would go into detention purely because the family situation is such they can't go home, we can place them in a foster home or in a shelter program and not have them in our facility. So if you're looking at 208 of these kids, our average facility for detention, like in Boyd, Boyd is one of our smaller ones, it's 30, but the most of the other ones are 40. You're talking about 5 additional centers you would have to house those kids if we weren't able to do that. So I always like to tout that as one of the better things that we do. And we have a map here, just kind of shows you where we're spread out pretty much all throughout the state with our different facilities. So detention talk a little bit about that, because it's kind of our, like I said, it's the one that's been most in the news, and it's also the one that is one of the first things that we're involved with that. And before there was ever Senate Bill 200, for anybody old enough as me or whatever, there was House Bill 117. And that created the Department of Juvenile Justice. It came out as a result of the consent decree that we were under. And at that time, it went from being a county-operated detention to a state-operated. And at the time it was county, there was only 2 standalone juvenile detention centers, and that was in Fayette and Louisville. The other kids were in adult jails and had some very poor consequences as a result of that. So DJJ became the state agency to also do detention. So what we did was we broke the state up, and we had catchment areas, and the catchment areas went to their assigned detention center. And so just like an adult jail, there was a mixture of populations. So you had girls and boys in the facility. You had the status offender 11-year-old I talked about, and the 17-year-old in the same. And that has been the system since it was established several years ago. So then Senate Bill 200 came along in 2014, and it did remove a lot of the low-level kids, which is what it was supposed to do, and it did it, which I think is a good thing. And they moved them to alternative community options. So we have court-designated workers and others that do a lot of those diversion efforts. DJJ does not play a role in deciding when youth are detained. I think a lot of people think we do. We don't. They were brought to our door, and that's the first time that we see them. I'll talk about that a second, too. So we did, look at how we can get those kids out. So basically what happened is you did that, we had a change in the population that we served. And we saw a lot more serious level kids in the building, which again, that was the purpose of it. Because we also know all the research shows that mixing low-level kids with more serious kids is not a good thing, that they become worse from doing that. So we want to keep that away from them. So you can see on the next page too, there's a little increase too of the felonies. You can see how they went from 42.9 to 72. Certainly a major change. Capital offenses in Class A and B's also increased. And I just, I have to mention that from my first stint in DJJ when I first left in 2004 and came back, if we had a kid on capital murder in one of our buildings back then, we were kind of like, everybody was sort of like, wow, oh my gosh, we have a kid who's committed a murder. And now it's, unfortunately, we have a high number of those youth in our system. And that's just kind of the way things have changed on that. The detention process, again, as I talked about how we get involved, when a youth is arrested, the court-designated worker is going to be involved. They're going to use their screening instruments. They're going to be contacting the judge, and they are going to be making the decision whether the youth goes back home or if the judge determines the youth should be taken to secure detention. And if that is the outcome, law enforcement brings them to us. And like I said, they bring them to us, they ring the doorbell or whatever, and that's the first time we've seen that kid. We know nothing about them. We've got a sheet that has their name, their charge, their age, whatever, and we don't know anything else. We don't know if they're on medication. We don't know their school level, whether they're, a junior reading on a 5th grade level or in the gifted classes. We don't know their food allergies. We don't know anything. So there's a lot of triaging that goes on. And so we may have these kids just a very short time. Kids don't get bail in juvenile court. Instead, they get a detention hearing. That's the legal process. And that has to happen within 24 to 48 hours, excluding weekends and holidays, of their arrest. So you actually might have a kid come in, Monday night just before midnight, and Tuesday morning at 8, he's taken out for court, and that's it. We never see him again. So they're only with us a few hours. They may come in on a Friday, go to court Monday morning, get released. We never see them again. Some do come back. They are held till further court processes or until an aunt comes up willing to take them, or we'll find them an alternative or whatever. But every time they leave and go to court, we have no idea if they're coming back. That is a judicial decision and not something that DJJ is involved in. At the bottom there, if they do commit the youth to us, and we make a determination of the placement, and then we'll transport them to their next place where they'll go. So we basically have 2 types of kids, as I mentioned before, the pre-adjudication kids and the post-adjudication, which I'll talk about in a minute. And as I mentioned, the juvenile detention centers mainly have the kids who are awaiting a court process. beginning in this year, in December, we started a whole new system, and we are now separating girls and boys. We operated, Campbell opened it as a specific girls facility, and now we have high and low. So we're no longer mixing the 11-year-old status offender in with the 17-year-old youth charged with capital offense. We're able to do that. We've always done that with the post-disposition youth. But this is something new that is, I think, a broad, bold step that we're doing, and something needed for our kids that were also in the detention model. As I said, we're housing kids across all different risk, crimes, individual needs. The average length of stay is really kind of hard to get, because you may have some of those kids who are there hours. You may have some who are there a few days, weeks, and then we actually have the youth who are going through the circuit court process, tried as adults, and they may stay years. We've had a kid up to 3 years waiting, and some of them still aren't even done. They get moved to the adult jail. We have some kids who are 5 and 6 years and still haven't had a final resolution of their court case. So those kind of inflate our numbers, and it's really hard to get a true length of stay. I think I already mentioned the fact that we do a lot of triaging with that. And the other thing that on there is, because of that ongoing kids coming in and out all the time and not knowing how long they're going to be there, and in the pre-adjudication, we're somewhat limited on what we can do in detention. What we do have is mental health services and education services that we do. Our counselors will help the kids contact their parents, which we are very liberal with our calls to families. I'm not sure how much of you are aware of criminal justice stuff, but generally a lot of states charge. When the kid charges home, the parents have to pay for it, or their kids pay for it. All of our calls are free. We encourage contact. Our counselors work with the kids to maintain. They get calls home, and they get some Zoom calls also, so that they can keep those family connections going. They also we have a lot of kids on suicide risk precautions, and that's another thing we screen the youth. We ask them if they've ever tried to kill themselves or harm themselves. We try to find out, if they've been depressed, if they've been receiving prior, mental health services. And as needed, we make referrals. We have our own mental health staff that we can make, our chief psychiatrist and our regional psychologist, who can come in and assist and make those referrals, and sometimes some medication management and so forth. The other thing that we do is with the education. We have kids from 4th grade to college. In the same classroom, basically. We do a lot of credit recovery. Kids do get a full 6-hour school day. And if a youth has already graduated high school, we can actually get them into some college classes. And if not that, we do some life skills, or we try to do something. Education is probably our strongest point for detention that we can do, because we can try to do some assessment and find out where the kid is and try to get them. And we actually have some kids that do actually graduate. It's usually the kids who are in there for a long time, pending court processes as an adult, that are more likely, but to get their GED or high school diploma. And the other thing on the limitations in detention for formal treatment that people don't a lot of understand, they'll say, well, the kid works some way through the program. Well, they do not, because again, they are only there while the court's deciding what to do with them. So we don't do treatment like we do in our post disposition programs. First off, we actually have kids, believe it or not, who come in who cases will be dismissed and they were not guilty for what they were charged. The fact that they haven't been found guilty also means they have a right to refuse treatment. If we were going to give treatment, we would actually have to get informed consent from the parent to do that. I think you can probably understand that if your child was arrested, you wouldn't necessarily want somebody assuming something that they need without, any finding of guilt or whatever. And the other thing that inhibits this is that effective treatment. What we do in our post-disposition, we talk about what got you here today. And we talk about what you've done, the things you've done, why you've done them. And you really can't have that discussion in detention, because the kids have attorneys who are going to say, don't talk to anybody. And if they do, our staff do not have the confidentiality. So somebody could subpoena them and say, what did that kid tell you in group? Did he tell you he did this or whatever? So we have to be really careful about what we do on that. And we actually have some youth who don't need treatment services. If you have a kid coming in because they're stealing food and they're hungry, probably what we need to do is get somebody to work with the family to get some financial resources out there. It's not cognitive behavioral therapy may not help in that circumstance. So again, we just see a real large number of kids across the state. Now, post-adjudication, it's a whole nother thing. When they come to that, we know tons about them. We have our community worker, every youth gets one, and they're going to talk with the family. We're going to find out all the medical information, the mental health. We're going to get school records. We're going to look at, anything and everything we can find out about that youth. And then we'll go through a classification, which is a panel meeting, and decide which of our facilities would best serve that youth. And we're going to look at the offense, what risks they have to the community. We're also we just know our facilities. We know Lake Cumberland does really well with a lot of the mental health kids, so that's maybe target from them. If we have our younger kids, we may try to target them more for a group home. One of our group homes is for independent living for youth who have nobody to go back to, and they're nearing emancipation age, and that's up in Ashland. And a lot of those kids, we have gone to like Job Corps, and they, I think they've actually worked at one of the local fast food places up there and are able to save up some money to help them get an apartment. But the last thing we want to do is have a kid stay with us in our building at 18 and open the door and say bye. So we want to make sure that we transition those kids in a careful, thoughtful way. So we're able to do a lot of individual things. And I did mention our day treatment centers. And these, as I've said, are for all sorts of different kids that we might do. And for those, they are going to remain in their own home. So that chart there will just kind of show you the breakdown there of what we were talking about. And the other thing I don't want to forget to tell you about, too, is our community services. And this is something a lot of people kind of forget. The facilities get most of the attention and so forth. But we have offices across the state. We have 37 offices, juvenile service workers, and we do probation and also what a lot of people would call parole, but we call it aftercare. We try to stay away from some of the adult terms for youth coming back out of the facility to help transition them back. They begin working on reentry the day the kid goes, and they work with the family. They help set up family visits. We have family counseling involved in the facilities. The workers will come be involved in that. So they also prepare all the predisposition reports for the court. They do prevention work. We have a lot of contracts. We do with some evidence-based models with the youth advocate program. We have in, I think, like five or six different places now where trained mentors are placed with the kids and work with the youth and the family. We're doing multisystemic therapy where we pay providers that are assigned to do very intensive in-home work. Mentoring programs, school-based things. So we put money out there for local communities to use. And in all, as far as on our like computer caseload type thing, we probably have about 1,400 kids at any point. And that's not counting the other 1,000 something that are in our contracted day treatments. So we really touch a lot of kids throughout the state, and I think more than probably most people realize. I'm sorry.
Let me start. I just want to, one of the things that we're focusing on, Mr. Chairman, is that distinction between pre-adjudication and detention facilities and post-adjudication and their facilities and programs. What Senate Bill 200 also included, one of the first states in the country where we focused on evidence-based treatment programs in those post-adjudication programs and facilities, and that's a trend that's been going on in the criminal justice system now for years, and the Department for Juvenile Justice is a practitioner of ensuring that we have evidence-based treatment programs that really have been proven through studies and studies of studies, to be effective. The other thing I wanted to mention, that going back to the historical part that the commissioner spoke about, is it was in 1995 that the U.S. Department of Justice notified the Commonwealth of Kentucky that they were going to be investigating our various juvenile facilities. And in those cases, those were county-operated facilities, as the commissioner had said. And then in 1996, as a result of their findings, due to the conditions that they found, the Commonwealth entered into a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice. I will mention, since this is a budget subcommittee, in the 1997 special session on post-secondary education, that's when we first started funding the state-operated detention facilities, the capital budgets, and moving in that direction in the creation of the Department of Juvenile Justice. So we've come a long way for there, but the distinction that we're drawing between pre-adjudication and the detention centers and post-adjudication is really critical, because the problems that have arisen recently are in the detention centers. As you all know, that there have been acts of violence that have occurred in these detention facilities that have both harmed youth and the workers in those detention staff facilities. And they've been life-threatening. And some facilities have incurred substantial property damage due to some of the youth who are acting out in those facilities. You know, one of the core foundational issues around that is staffing, and the lack thereof. Just like an adult correctional institution, you have to have the right amount of posts, the right amount of manpower there to control and contain and prevent these kinds of activities among this varied group that the commissioners talked about, from individuals who've committed violence to individuals who were there because the court said to detain them before their court appearances. And so these acts of violence and these interruptions not only cause harm, but they interrupt for example, the educational facilities, the 6 hours of education that that we want to have in those detention centers. And so security has become more paramount. As one of the prior slides showed, we have a larger percentage of we'll call it high crime charged individuals in there than before. A greater share, not only because of Senate Bill 200, but the superintendents at these detention centers, local law enforcement, and now I'm paraphrasing what Secretary Harvey has learned in his conversations with law enforcement around the state, is there's definitely a change in the level of violence and propensity for violence among some of these youth offenders compared to the past. That's just a cultural, societal issue that is really what's causing some of the disruptions and difficulties in our detention centers, which are exacerbated by the lack of staffing. And so those are the two kind of trends that are taking place that are, in many cases, a source of the problems that we have been seeing.
If I can intervene on the staffing issue,
Sure.
I know there was an increase to 50,000 that was funded in FY 2023. Can you provide more detail?
Yes,
on
no,
that?
I'll be glad to. In fact, I've got a slide here in a minute that'll address that. On one of the things that we've got is when this administration came in, there have been some small previous attempts, but a youth worker at a detention center who started with the department was making about $30,000. Let me just jump to a slide. I think that will help. And we have had, and I'll go back even a little bit before that, Mr. Chairman. In the 2018-2020 budget, there was a recognition of the need for more staffing in the detention centers particularly, and there was funding provided, but actually the staffing levels dropped, even though there was a recognition of the need for more staff. And so in essence, the funding that was put there to provide more staff didn't occur, it didn't get implemented because we couldn't attract the workers there. And so in December of 2021, the governor had announced a 10% raise for all security positions at juvenile justice. We did the same thing at the same time with the adult correctional institutions because of the difficulty in staffing our adult correctional institutions there. And so that 10% went into place just at that point in time. It was carried through in the budget process. You all provided the amount of funding the governor recommended to sustain that. And then in the budget, as you all know, there was an 8% across the board increase for all state employees, affecting also juvenile justice. So in those two actions, right, we raised the pay from 30,000 to, almost another 20%. That didn't solve the problem. We were still getting low number of applicants to these open positions. Been to job fairs, using the personnel cabinet system of communicating and posting positions, and just have not had any good results out of the raises in the pay associated with that. So recently in October, the governor, because of those failures to attract the sufficient staffing, the governor asked, he directed to raise the pay even further. So another 25% to about $44,600. And one of the ways we did that was through what we call a locality premium, which we often use in the correctional institutions as well, to give a higher pay to a particular location and a particular job type, like a correctional officer or the youth service worker. And still not seeing the full thing. So one of the things we wanted to do, and Representative Petrie asked me this question, is why did you pick this value to this salary to attract? And part of it is a combination of it hadn't worked as we incrementally increased pay. We haven't achieved a greater number of applications and hires. And the other side is kind of a bit of an attraction, right? What is a figure for which we can think we can get a higher number of staffing there? And so $50,000 is that was one of the reasons we chose to make that effort and just went into effect earlier this month. And we're starting to see a little bit of greater interest. We're still too early to say. Keeping up with the cabinet, the department, and the personnel cabinet, who is also working with the cabinet to try to post and attract and market these positions. About the same time, the Fayette Urban County government announced that they're raising their beginning pay of their jail workers to $50,000 with a $3,000 signing bonus. So they're kind of incorporating the same idea of we're incrementally moving up the level of salary so that we can attract enough people to be able to come in and create a staffing pattern within the detention centers that provides a safe and secure facility for the youth who are there and the staff who are working in there. And so in order to finance that in the current fiscal year, Mr. Chairman, we've essentially, because we had so many positions we couldn't hire, so we decided to devote those resources rather than remaining dormant, to this increase in pay. And I might add,
What does that cover within DJJ? The 50,000. Does that cover all?
it explains only the youth workers who are now being positioned as correctional officers in the 8 detention centers.
Correct.
Because that is the area that we've had the biggest problem. It's where we have the violent attacks. It's where we have the most vacant positions and the least amount of staffing. The commissioner can talk about in some of these other areas, in the youth development centers, the group homes, the day treatment centers, we have other youth workers who do really great work. But we're not having anywhere near the same kind of staffing problems in those facilities as we are in the detention center. So the idea here was to target. It was to target these solutions to this targeted problem in the detention centers. And so we've used, in essence, the funds that were available by not being able to hire to initiate that. And later I'm going to show you, what the dollar figure is to sustain that into the next fiscal year.
I have a 2-part question, and then I believe Representative Kulkarni has a question. What are your thoughts on House Bill 3, and how does that compare to the administration's proposal to retrofit the Linden facility?
One of the things in House Bill 3, there is an appropriation of $8.9 million to retrofit, I'll say, the former detention center located in downtown Louisville. At least that's what we believe that was intended there. Because we also operate a facility, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, in Jefferson County in Linden, Kentucky, that was put in place after the Louisville-Jefferson Metro government decided to no longer provide detention center services to the Jefferson County youth. And that's something I want to make sure everybody knows, that in late 2019, that was the only detention center in the Commonwealth operated by a locality. And that's been a long arrangement between the department and Louisville Metro, and they decided to no longer, they didn't have to do it by law. It was an agreement. There was an agreement by which we paid them a certain dollar figure per day per youth. So they didn't finance that. The Commonwealth did, but they operated it. So we shifted, when they closed down, we had to shift over to the facility in Linden, which was previously a youth development center, not intended to be a full detention center. I had to make some retrofits to make that, try to make that a more appropriate, secure facility. Going back to House Bill 3, Representative Bratcher, he's got in there a dollar figure to retrofit the facility downtown. Now, we are in communication with the Louisville Metro government because the Commonwealth hasn't, with our Finance Administration Cabinet and our facilities folks within the Justice and Public Safety Cabinet and the Department of Juvenile, we haven't done a full walkthrough there to see what are the renovations that would be necessary to bring that facility back to a secure detention center. So the first reaction to that is, I don't know if $8.9 million is the right number, because we haven't had an opportunity to go in there and kind of determine, well, what are the things that have to be done. And we've got people with the Finance Administration Cabinet, along with the experts in the Juvenile Justice Department, who can at least go through that. We're in the process of communicating closely with the Metro government on that, and we're scheduling a walkthrough to start that. So my first reaction is, let's not yet set that $8.9 million in stone, because we're not sure if that's the right number. Secondly, another issue is that project in House Bill 3 is appropriated next year. We need the money this year so we can get started as soon as possible if we were to move forward with that facility. Thirdly, the Commonwealth as a practice, does not appropriate funds to the Department of Juvenile Justice to retrofit another government's building. We don't do that with the private sector. We don't do it with the public sector. So we need to work through, well, whose building is that, and when does the Commonwealth put investment in there? The goal, though, is to create a facility for that area of the state that can handle higher security offenders. So we all agree on the goal, which is to have a location in our largest community in the Commonwealth that can handle, as a detention center, the youth there. Now, we'll add, just as we've had challenges in our adult correctional institutions in Oldham County, right? We've got the Kentucky State Reformatory, the Luther Lucca Correctional Complex, the Rotorua Correctional Center. We've had very difficulty keeping staffing up in that labor market, which includes the Jefferson metro area. And so one of the cautions I had is we might be able to build the facility, but will we be able to staff it? Because of the good labor market that's going on in the Louisville metro area. Secondly, on House Bill 3, there are provisions in there that mandate the courts to detain youth offenders who have been charged with certain crimes. Right now, the courts have that discretion as to what is the disposition before the pre-detention hearing of where should a youth go. Should he go home with his family? Should he go back to his foster home? Should he, those are questions they decide. So right now, we don't know, if that were to be in place, how many more youth would be mandatorily detained in Kentucky in these facilities, and whether or not we have the capacity, much less the staffing, to accommodate that. So another caution I would have about that is the administrative office of the court. This is a three-branch of government problem. It is all three branches of government. The executive branch, we're taking the actions that we have discretion to, the judicial branch through the court system, then the legislative branch, and we'll talk about the roles of appropriating funds and passing statutory changes. So those are my first comments, Mr. Chairman, about that bill. We understand the spirit and intent, particularly of the 8.9 million, but we think there are some things to be further considered before we really can land on, a position there.
All right, Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for presenting here today. I probably have a couple of questions. One has to do with the previous slide, but I'll start with the staffing related question since that's what we've been talking about. My understanding is that this $50,000 increase in starting salary is based on these workers being reclassified as corrections officers as opposed to youth workers. And so my question is around the professional development and training that these individuals are going to get. Because we're talking about kids, I'm talking about just your detention and not the pre-adjudication centers at this point. So I had a question about that in terms of what training they're going to get. And then a larger question going back to, which was really kind of triggered by one of your previous slides talking about mental health and education services that are provided in these facilities. The picture that you painted in that situation when you were talking about it is at odds with a lot of what's been reported as in terms of what actually goes on in the facilities and the kids being locked up for most of the day as opposed to getting these services. So my other question has to do with staffing in terms of is there a plan to hire any more mental health workers or education workers for these kids, or is it just corrections based? And then what is your response to that in terms of what you're saying these kids are getting versus what is being reported coming out of these facilities?
Let me address our first question about the raise in pay and the transition to a correctional officer. Those aren't, I'll say, dependent upon one another. The raise in pay to $50,000 was simply to raise the pay to attract more workers, right? No matter what position title we would put on it, okay? The idea working with our personnel cabinet and with the Justice and Public Safety cabinet to reclassify the positions to correctional officers is as a distinction to youth service workers, which are in the day treatment programs, group homes, the youth development centers, is to emphasize the characteristics of security. And to ensure, and I'll let the Commissioner talk about training, ensure that they have the proper kind of training because of the characteristics of the population has changed, but our approach in terms of ensuring a secure facility has not adjusted fully to the fact that we've got higher crime individuals and some of the incidents that you've read about. I would go back to, but it's all foundationed on the level of staffing, the number of workers that we can have there that are really the key to assuring the security. And I'll let the commissioner talk about the training, but one of the other things we've initiated for the detention centers only is to have some defensive equipment there in order to be able to handle a situation that gets out of hand. So that they are safer, and the other youth who may not be involved in the incident can be safer as well. But training is really critical, and I'm glad you pointed out, Representative Kulkarni, because one of the things that we have already initiated, and I'll let the commissioner add, is we've been working with our Department of Corrections to provide that kind of training on defensive equipment and other security features that that's what they were trained for, and we've got them right there in the cabinet, and they have already begun that training process for the detention center staff. But let the commissioner add to those.
Right, and let me say that the fact that we're switching over to that job title does not mean that we're looking at the way we treat kids completely different, and we're not going to still treat kids like kids. We have a 6-week training academy that all new staff go through. They start off with at least 2 weeks of on-the-job training where they're just following and mentoring, or, being mentored in the facility. And then they have a week of safe physical management training, the restraint techniques. They have a week of health services protocol. And then they have 4 other weeks that includes a lot of virtual classes now on everything from adolescent brain development, trauma-informed care, de-escalation of youth, and all the other types of things that we have for kids. And they'll still continue to get that. Training is always something we're looking at. Our staff have to even know like how to spot abuse and neglect and how to make an abuse and neglect referral, because you may have a kid coming into the detention, and in the process of changing into the uniform, you see where they have belt marks all over them. And so our staff have to know everything about a lot of child welfare stuff as in addition to. So that's something we're still doing. As far as the services and what's going on with those, we do have a counselor position, 1 to like each 10 youth. I will state that we do have issues with hiring those as well. And so that's something right now, a lot of schools are also hiring mental health folks, and so we're sort of sometimes a competition for who gets who out of the limited numbers that we have. In some of the areas where we're having difficulty hiring those, we're actually doing contracts with local providers to come in and do the service with our kids. So we're always looking to do that. And like I said, we have our chief psychiatric doctor and the 2 folks, and that's under him at a contract with UK. And then we have our 3 regional psychologists, and they have folks under them. We have to do all the sex offender assessments. They have to assess for suicide. So we still get they're still getting all the mental health services. The fact is the kids in some of our facilities are not what we call moving as much, and I hate that. I don't like kids to spend 1 more second in a cell than they have to, but when you don't have enough staff to safely move a group of kids from here to there without worrying that either a youth or staff is going to get hurt, we're having to have more in either the pods or in the cell areas, and we're trying to do as much with that we can. They're still getting school services. We have the teachers rotating around doing that, and these are not all of our centers. These are just of the ones that we're having the most difficulty with staffing. And one of the things, let me mention with the staffing that we want to go to is we've always need more robust staffing, because one of the things about our kids, when you have a pod of 8 or 10 kids, they thrive on attention. And so you've got that one kid who really having an issue, being able to have 2 people in there so that one person can go deal with that kid who's starting to act up and de-escalate him without worrying about the other kids in there, and that somebody has your back. So having to be able to have, instead of the 1 to 8, more of a 1 to 5 ratio, we think would make a tremendous difference in the safety of the youth and the kids and the services that we get them. So, this is a relationship business, and our youth workers become, quasi-parents in some case. I mean, the kids are, you're talking about 11, 12, 13-year-olds in some instance. So, they're still in that sort of some of our most effective workers, it's surprising. You may have some 20-something-year-old who's 25 and 6'2", but you may have some 62-year-old grandma that's in there, and she's the one that keeps the kids in line even better because she's got that parental voice, and they're still kids, and they know that. So, we're looking at, we have all sorts of people who work in there. We've also, one of the things that I did was, because of the COVID, we were not able to have the robust programming we used to have. We used to have groups come in all the time. We had Boys to Men, we had Arts on the Move coming in, we had, Shakespeare behind bars, we had all these. And when the pandemic hit, we had to cut all that out. So one of the things that I did was we established an institutional rec leader for each of our facilities, and we're still haven't got fully staffed on those, but where we've had those, we've seen, the ability to really just keep the kids engaged, to do art stuff, to do a book club, to have yoga classes, just also movie nights. So that has helped a lot. We've tried to augment that program. As we're able now to open back up, we're starting to reach out to some of those groups. Arts on the Move comes in every Wednesday and spends 4 or 5 hours doing an hour with each group of therapeutic art classes for our kids at Fayette. And so we're looking to duplicate that in some other places. So programming is essential. So please do not think that we at all are not concentrating on that.
Are improvements to the Jefferson Regional Juvenile Detention Center needed if the downtown facility is renovated?
The answer is yes, because we would still want to separate high-level offenders in a more secure detention center than lower-level offenders in the Linden facility. So we just opened up the first 10 beds. That's all we can have right now. It's about a 30-bed facility. So we see the need to have a bifurcated 2 sets of locations there so that we can have the treatment programs or the services that the commissioner talked about in the lower levels more consistent and less interrupted.
Okay. If the downtown facility is renovated, would the Jefferson Regional Juvenile Detention Center in Linden revert to a day treatment center?
No, sir. It would remain a detention center, again, for the lower-level offenders that come out of that community.
Okay, I'd asked previously about the $50,000, the increase to $50,000. If entry-level youth workers who are now, I guess, dubbed as correctional officers currently receive $50,000, what amount of pay do upper echelon positions earn, such as maybe a corrections lieutenant, sergeant, etc.? Do you have any documentation that details the new bands for each of the new positions created in DJJ?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I wanted to address that. Is while we're raising the entry-level pay, the method by which we're doing it, as I mentioned earlier, was called a locality premium. So it's kind of $1 per hour. Think of it as a fixed dollar value, X number of dollars. And we provided that locality premium to every worker who was in the facility so that the salary levels between a beginning level correctional officer youth worker and the next one up didn't compress. It stayed the same. So we were able to give raises to the existing employees because we want to retain them. And the method we did that was through the locality premium.
Okay. If vacancy credits were used in fiscal year 2023 to cover the increase in salaries to $50,000, can't vacancy credits be used to continue funding the increase in 2024 as opposed to requiring the General Assembly to appropriate an additional $3.2 million?
Well, the answer is no. And the reason is that the staffing level we have now is unacceptable. We have to have more staff here in order to avoid the problems that we've been describing here today. And so we have here on this slide, they have worked hard at revising and looking at their staffing patterns within the detention centers themselves. And there is a need for more workers, right? So if we don't have more workers, we're not going to solve this problem, period. And so in order to have more workers, we need additional funding to be able, and we're hopeful, that higher salary is going to be an attraction to those more employees. So without more funding in fiscal 24 to hire more people, then we've really done nothing to resolve this problem.
This is, I guess, kind of let's just try to distill this all the way down as succinctly as possible. What is the ask DJJ is making, and what's the price tag on that?
The ask, as shown on this slide here, is to sustain the $50,000 increase in the locality premiums I mentioned, $3.2 million, to really expand our transportation services because of the change in locating in detention centers high-level offenders in our 3 highest level security facilities, Adair, Warren, Fayette, and take the burden off local law enforcement, who now have a greater transportation responsibility as they transport these children and these youth across the state. The hiring of more staff is 146 more employees. And we've got a phase-in process that shows that $9.7 million. And the other thing that Secretary Harvey has testified to is the Department of Juvenile Justice really doesn't have a very good IT system for youth offender management like we do in adult correctional institutions. So we're using federal grant funds this year to begin to implement that youth offender management system. We have a small amount of money to maintain that in the outer years. Just as importantly is on the capital budget, we've identified a greater level of security issues associated with the physical plant. So we need more perimeter fencing in these facilities. We need greater security for the entrance, the vehicle entrance into these facilities. We're calling them a security post, but that can encompass a physical post, including video and cameras and other security features. We have had our new director of security, Larry Chandler, who was a warden at 6 adult correctional institutions in Kentucky, is really well regarded. He has been identifying within these facilities certain security improvements that will maintain better security inside the facility. And we have a handful of things at each of the 8 facilities we want to do. We've got improvements to the Jefferson County Detention Center here, which is the Linden facility, in order to make all 30 of those cells what we call wet cells, right? So they've got toilets and running water. Right now we only have 10 of them. We need $4.5 million to bring that up to all 30 locations. And then we're looking at design funding for new detention centers. We've got to modernize. I mentioned earlier the age of some of these facilities. As age is 25 years old, and the change in the character of some of the youth that are detained there. We're thinking about having design funding for a couple of facilities that accommodate this change in location of the detained youth, and and could incorporate, as you said, Mr. Chairman, the other actions there in the Jefferson County to assure a secure detention facility there. And then one last thing, we don't want to forget about our correctional institutions. We have a significant staffing shortage in those locations. We have a way in Kentucky, right, where that doesn't cause as great a problem of overcrowding in adult facilities, because Kentucky and Louisiana use our county jails for Class C and D offenders and locate them there. So we have a little bit of a relief valve there. But we've got a significant problem in hiring correctional officers, and not just in the Oldham County area, including Eddyville and the Kentucky State Penitentiary, our maximum security. So we want to also bring their beginning level salaries and the locality premium I mentioned up to the same level we're just talking about for the juvenile detention centers. So that's another area that is interactive in terms of that. The other thing I want to mention, just Mr. Chairman, we've done a couple things. Temporarily, we have the state police who are in our highest security facilities 24/7 because of the low staffing, just to be a preventive and helpful there. They're not doing treatment, they're not doing the services that the commissioner talked about, but they're there as a presence to help avoid some of these significant actions that have taken place. We're also using, as we talked to Representative Kulkarni, the Department of Corrections has really stepped up and are providing some advice and training associated with the defensive equipment. So our ask is there. On the legislative side, on the statutory side, 2 elements. One, we would like to see a statute that qualifies these youth detainees for bail. We have it for adults, we don't have it for youth. If there's a youth who is being tried as an adult, they get bail. A youth who's not tried as an adult doesn't get bail. It gives the courts another tool. Secondly, we would like to remove status offenders and Class B misdemeanors from detention, period. And so that's including for violation of court orders. Some of the reasons that some of these individuals are detained is because they failed to appear, for example, in court. And they wouldn't otherwise have been at a detention center, but they were because of the violation of court orders. So those are two of the elements, Mr. Chairman, that are not appropriation related, but are statutory changes that the General Assembly, we're asking, the General Assembly to consider.
Hey, if you could just kind of a guesstimate on what the potential price tag would be on.
Yeah, I did see that there. I think it's about just short of $20 million in the operating budget in fiscal '24, and about $26 million on the capital side for juvenile detention centers. And we're also recommending the $30 million on the adult correctional institutional staffing. And being budget director, I can assure you, the money's there. We've raised the consensus forecasting group raised the official estimate for the current year to 1.4 billion more than was already budgeted. Now that's just been shaved a little bit with House Bill 1 that just got passed, lowering the income tax rate from 4.5% to 4%. But even if you take that away, we still have a sustained level of recurring resources that are there, not only for this, but for some of the other of the governor's recommendations, particularly in the area of K-12 education and universal pre-K.
Thank you. Any members have any other questions? Don't believe so. Well, this is a very multifaceted issue. It's complex, a lot of moving parts. I know there's been a lot of time dedicated the last several weeks to this topic, and I appreciate you all coming today and testifying and making this presentation. There are some additional questions, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to ask. If I could submit those to you all, and maybe some follow-up questions from today, and get that back to us and the members, I would appreciate it.
Be glad to, Mr. Chairman.
Before we adjourn, I have two constituents in the audience I'd like to recognize. I have J.C. Bates, my intern. Looks like J.C.'s waving at us there. And in the back, I have my banker, Mark Strother. I think he's here with the Kentucky Bankers Association today. You take out a couple loans, they show up to see you. So I'll have it paid by the end of the month, Mark. But if there are no other questions, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. Meeting's adjourned.